Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the GD Report. I am D.
And I'm G. Good to be
Great.
here.
Yeah, it's great to see everybody. Great to see you, G man. We're going to start. All of our topics are serious, but in particular, just a mass tragedy in your state where you are happened this week, and just uh, meditations out to the families of those that have been killed senselessly in the shooting at King Soopers there in Boulder, um, which leads us to our first topic to talk about gun control, or as I like to call it, common sense gun regulation. Not necessarily gun control, but why don't you have any thoughts about the tragedy that happened since you're right there in the state?
Yeah, so Governor Polis has ordered all the flags at public buildings to be at half staff for the next 10 days. I thought that was a nice little tribute. 10 people, if you haven't seen the news, 10 people were gunned down by a 21-year-old Muslim. And I bring up his religion affiliation for this reason. There's a lot of issues with this shooting. He has a juvenile record that was released where he basically beat the crap out of a fellow classmate who was bullying him. He caught him off guard, punched him in the head, knocked him out of his desk, jumped on top of him, and proceeded to pummel him. So, we're seeing a lot of issues around the country right now. Asians are being vilified for, Trump's labeling them with phrases like Kung flu and China virus, and they're getting the blame for COVID and the deaths, and that's just wrong. And what this kid did was wrong, but he was isolated. Some say radicalized. His parents said he was a loner, and that just breeds the sentiment for somebody doing something like what he just did. So he took an AR-15 type of assault rifle. It wasn't an AR-15. It was more like a pistol rifle. And he started in the parking lot. He killed several people in the parking lot. He went into the store, killed a bunch of people there, stripped down to his shorts. They don't say how he got shot in the leg, but I'm guessing a police officer shot him in the leg, maybe even the police officer who died, Officer Talley, 51-year-old who had 7 kids. But it's just another incident. And so, what happens? Everybody throws out, thoughts and prayers. Ted Cruz got vilified for it because he was one of the first to say that. But that's all we do. We offer thoughts and prayers, and we don't come up with any meaningful legislation on either side to fix this problem. There's a poll out. It's a USA Today Ipsos poll. 65% overall say gun laws should be stricter. And we've got a lot of loopholes. Like, you can go to a gun show and buy a gun with no background check. There's a 3-day hold, I believe, if you go to a legitimate gun store and buy a gun, which I think this guy did. He went to a gun store and bought a gun.
Was that the day before when he bought it?
No, he bought it a week before, they said. But his family said this guy had mental issues. As we were talking in the pre-show, Australia dealt with this, and they dealt with it very matter-of-factly, and so did New Zealand after the mosque shootings. So what happened in Australia was, several decades ago, they had a mass shooting, and the government swept in and said, there's no more guns. You can't have any more guns unless you belong to a gun club. Your gun club must own land that you can hunt on. You have to check your gun out. You have to check it back in. You have to hunt on their land. And if you have so much as even like a domestic violence conviction, you're not getting a gun. You're not getting your hands on a gun. And they don't have the gun violence that we do. They don't have near the murder rate that we do. Can you still kill somebody without a gun? Sure you can. We did it for centuries. You could do it with a spear, a sword, a knife.
Well, and that argument that people try to make about what's next, are you going to outlaw knives? Are you going to, cars kill more people? Are you going to outlaw cars? It's a straw man argument.
Well, our illustrious, I believe he's a senator, John Kennedy from Louisiana, made that exact same argument. He compared mass shootings to DWI, and he basically said taking guns off the street is like penalizing all the legal drivers, all the non-drunk drivers.
And it's just not the case. And the thing is, with our, obviously the big debate is the fact that our Second Amendment guarantees the right to bear arms in a well-regulated militia. If we're going to talk about the original intent, which is what the right wing always wants to talk about, is original intent of the framers. They talked about a militia and about having a militia because we didn't have a standing army at the time.
Right.
And so that was the reference point there. The other thing is, people seem to forget that the biggest lobbying arm for supposed gun rights, and I don't like that term at all, but supposed gun ownership rights is the National Rifle Association, which is in big turmoil right now because their leadership is suing the ad agency and their board of directors, and there's all kinds of things going on. But people forget the National Rifle Association was founded and funded primarily by the gun manufacturers.
Right.
And why do the gun manufacturers want to do that? Because they want to convince everyday people that it's your right to have as many guns as you want, as high a caliber as you want, as many magazines as you want,
right.
And the thing is, it's gotten to the point where it's almost gone 360 degrees. It's like they're chasing their tail because their argument, the fact that they would argue against background checks for every gun purchase, how does that infringe on anybody who doesn't have anything in their background?
Right.
The fact that they want to, rail against laws that say, people with a mental history should not be allowed to have guns. The red flag laws that people, that have a domestic violence case have to turn their guns in. All those kinds of laws that are really basic, doesn't go nearly as far as you're talking about with Australia or New Zealand.
Yeah.
Basic gun safety laws.
Right.
And they want to fight even that because the argument is, it's a slippery slope. And next thing you know, they're going to come and take my shotgun. And they're going to take this and take that. And I think we've demonstrated over the last at least 50 years, if not 100 years, that we're not good at responsible gun ownership.
No. In New Zealand, I don't know if everybody remembers, but they had an Australian came over, bought a gun, an AR-15, and shot up 2 mosques. And not sure the body count, but it was, it was definitely double digits. And the prime minister there, she basically declared, and then their legislative body backed her up, that not only could they not sell any more assault weapons, but if you owned one, you had to turn it into the government to be destroyed. And they gave you 90 days to turn it in. And then it became a class 1 felony punishable by 5 years in prison. And there was a lot of, Drew and I were down there at that time on a vacation. And there was a lot of back and forth from people about, whether they should do it or not, whether this was overreach by the government. But in the end, sensibility won out and people turned their guns in. And you don't hear about a New Zealand having the trouble that we do. And I believe I read, this is the 7th mass shooting this year. We're not even a quarter through the year. We've already had 7 mass shootings. It's insane. And we got to do something about it. We just have to. So,
this could be, we'll talk about this later in this episode. It's one of our topics, but this could be a catalyst to getting rid of the filibuster.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move to our next topic.
Yeah, so that takes us to the great state of Virginia, which last year, Virginia had the second most executions in the country. And their legislature and governor just moved to become the first Southern state to abolish the death penalty. So the only state that was ahead of them is my home state of Texas, which will never abolish the death penalty.
Yeah. Well, it's a big step forward. There's a lot of problems with the death penalty. There's a lot of there's several cases where there's pretty compelling evidence that innocent people have been executed because of biased juries, biased judges, biased law enforcement. And so obviously that's the one penalty that there can be no do-overs for. The second thing is the argument that, and I thought more of our pro-life friends would be all over this one, arguing that that the value of life shouldn't cause someone to be executed. But I heard it explained one time when I was at a rally about some different causes, but they were talking about the death penalty and the need to abolish it. One of the things they said was that, when the state executes somebody, it's de facto all of us executing them.
Yep.
So it's you and me and everybody else executing that person. And so unless we all have a say in it, then we really don't have a representation when it comes. I think it's a nice move forward for Virginia. Virginia is an interesting state and a case study for states like North Carolina and Georgia, because it wasn't that long ago that Virginia was a solid red state.
Yep. Now they're a solid blue state.
And solid blue and not looking back.
Yeah. So this makes Virginia the 23rd state. So we're not even halfway. The 23rd state to abolish the death penalty. For those that are wondering, Colorado, my current state, does not have the death penalty. We abolished it about a year ago. But we really didn't have the death penalty anyway. It's been 20 years plus since we abolished it. I mean, since we executed anybody. And the way it worked was you could get the death penalty at your trial. You could get sentenced to death. And then when your case came up, when your execution date got close, you had to go before a 3-judge panel that ruled whether you were whether you should be executed or not. And in the past 20 years, no judges ruled in favor of the execution. And then we had a person who is known as the Chuck E. Cheese killer. He was fired at Chuck E. Cheese, came back a few days later and killed 5 of his co-workers. He was eligible for the death penalty, and our current Senator John Hickenlooper commuted his sentence to life during Hickenlooper's term. So what that meant was that as soon as Hickenlooper was replaced, he was term limited. He was in his second term when he did that. That he could be executed. And then when Governor Polis came in, he pushed the Democrats control both sides of the legislature now. He pushed them to abolish the death penalty, and they did.
Yeah, we in the state of Oklahoma, where I live, we do still have the death penalty. However, it's been challenged multiple times because of lethal injection was what we were using, and it was determined by the Supreme Court that the type of lethal injection we were doing was actually considered cruel and unusual punishment because of the suffering. So it violated the Constitution. So they've been trying to come up with new ways to execute. They've even talked at some point about. We talked about embarrassing laws that the Oklahoma legislature was considering. At one point, they were talking about bringing back the firing squad.
Well, they did that. Wasn't the last one to get executed by firing squad Gary Gilmore in Utah?
I think you're right. Yeah. So interesting times. All right. Well, speaking of unexplained phenomena, there is a report coming out later. I think you said it's in June. Is that correct? When that's
June? It's coming out June 1st. That's correct.
June 1st. That is It's going to be sounds like it's going to be some bombshell information. So why don't you tell us about it?
Right. So it's a report on unexplained aerial phenomenon, which is what the military uses to what the rest of us call UFOs. And it's gotten a little bit of traction, this report, for a couple of reasons. Early in the Trump administration, Trump forced the release of two videos taken from military pilots. You can see these on YouTube. I'll try to put the link on our in the comment in the descriptor section of our video.
That was painful.
Do what?
That description was painful.
Yeah. Anyway, these two videos show unexplained objects that are circular in shape, that are traveling faster than anything we've got that we can keep up with, or that we could keep up with, and that they make sharp turns that none of our aircraft can make. The pilots are amazed. One Pentagon official later admitted that those videos were never supposed to see the light of day. And so this report, which was tucked into this $2.3 trillion COVID relief bill that Trump signed in December, the directive of the report was put into that Intelligence Authorization Act. So former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe, who I believe was Trump's last NDI, he's been making the circuit talking about this, and he says there's a lot more sightings that have been made public. This report's going to be a blockbuster and a jaw dropper. There's a lot of, in the UFO world, there's a lot of rumors and innuendo about things that have happened. Supposedly, aliens beamed into the White House in the 1950s and met personally with Eisenhower, which really kind of gave him an alarm. Jimmy Carter said he had personal knowledge that there were aliens in the universe. He admitted that. I mean, there's more and more proof now that the Roswell crash was not what the Air Force said it was, since they've offered 3 different explanations over the various decades. So it's going to be an interesting report when it comes out. I'm kind of interested to see what all they say. It's being put together by the Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense, and the Director of National Intelligence.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much of it's redacted, if it's really
right.
If it turns out to be Geraldo's reveal of Al Capone's vault,
right,
then we'll know that the fix was in.
Right.
But
well, hopefully it'll be interesting stuff, and it'll give us some insight into what's really been going on. So.
Well, if Ratcliffe was involved, I'm sure the intelligence will say that the aliens revealed themselves to let us know that Trump actually won the election.
Right.
I told you on the pre-show that while I'm interested in a committee or a commission on alien intelligence, I would much rather have a committee to investigate in the intelligence of the GOP senators.
Right. Yeah, especially Ted Cruz and Kennedy.
Cancun Cruz.
Yeah.
That's right. All right. Well, what's our next topic?
Let's talk about voting rights and what's going on with that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting committee in committee meeting in the Senate Rules Committee today, which is typically not a hotbed of televised hearings.
Right.
But there was a hearing where the Senate Rules Committee talked about consideration of Senate Resolution 1, which is the Senate version of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act expired about 4 years ago, and the Republicans in Congress stalled any renewals on it. any updating on it. The Supreme Court also ruled about 5 years ago to nullify certain sections of the existing law to where states could basically, the southern states who had a history of discrimination were required to get pre-approvals for any changes to voting regulations in the past, and they had to get those from the Department of Justice. And so it was a lengthy process, and it was basically to ensure that Jim Crow did not come back.
Right.
And so the minute the Supreme Court ruled that they no longer had to get that pre-authorization, all the southern states suddenly started restricting the number of days you could vote in person absentee. They put all kinds of restrictions on.
Right.
And then what they found was, even with the restrictions they put in place, like in Texas, where they would do things like Harris County having one drop box in the entire county.
Yep.
Even though they did all that, they still lost the Senate, still lost the presidency. And even though gains were made by them in a lot of swing districts in the House, they did not gain control of the House.
Right.
So most political parties, when something like that happens, it's time for a deep, introspective committee, post-mortem, autopsy, if you will, where the party says we've got to reach out to different groups. We've got to get more on point with our populist message. We've got to reach the working class, whatever it may be. They come up with what didn't work in the election. Republican strategy so far has been, let's change the rules.
Right.
Let's restrict who can vote. Let's restrict how often they can vote. And let's pass voter restriction laws. So in fact, even in the state of Georgia, they were trying to restrict weekend voting, which would obviously fly right in the face of Souls to the Polls, which is a big promotion where a lot of African American churches try to get their parishioners to go vote on Sundays ahead of the elections, in-person absentee. There was a lot more restrictions as far as things like requiring a photo ID. And a lot of people say, oh, well, you have to show a photo ID for this, or you have to show a photo ID for that. Well, if you can prove with your address, or maybe with an electric bill, with other things, that you live at your address, there's lots of ways you can prove your identity. But I will tell you this, there's a lot of things that when you say you've got to require this type of ID or that type of ID, it really is basically designed to discriminate against poor people.
Yep.
Because there's a lot of poor people who don't have driver's license. They don't have the money to get a state issued ID. And if they want a state issue ID, they don't even have a way to get there to get it.
Yep.
So one of the laws in Georgia they also are considering is, besides restricting the number of days that people can in-person absentee vote ahead of time, besides restricting how people can register to vote, they also want to make it a Class A felony to give someone in line to vote something to eat or drink.
Yeah.
So basically, they want to go after any of the groups who are passing out bottles of water to people so they wouldn't pass out, because they created all these long lines for people voting.
Well, and the reason Georgia is so important in this is the Republicans are using it as a test case, and depending on how much backlash they get, which they're already getting some, even from their own Republican Party members. If they don't get a lot of backlash and they think that they can still pass this, they're going to roll it out into other conservative type states like Wisconsin and Arizona. And so, the states that look like they're on the verge of, actually being blue for a long time, these guys, that were just red, these guys want to roll these restrictions out and turn them back red for 2022 and beyond.
Well, and again, because of we've talked about this before on lots of podcasts, but because of the regressive nature of the Electoral College and the way that it's really biased towards the minority, and I don't mean minority groups when I say that, I mean the minority numbers.
Yeah.
44,000 votes is the total in the state of Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona. If 44,000 less votes for Biden or more votes for Trump would have happened, there would have been a tie in the Electoral College.
Yep.
And even though Joe Biden would have still won by over 7 million popular votes.
Right.
So
I think it was 18,000 in the 2016 election that put Trump over the top.
Yeah, and so that's why these things are so important, because anything they do to restrict to make it harder for people to vote, to make it when there's not weekend voting, there's it turns into issues about, if it takes 4 hours to vote and somebody's working an hourly job, they can't stand in line for 4 hours
Right.
because they're going to lose their job.
That's why here in Colorado, one of the things they're also trying to do is eliminate, I don't know, I can't remember if you said this or not, but they're trying to eliminate mail-in ballots.
Right.
Or make it harder. You have to have like you have to be on your deathbed to do a mail-in ballot.
You have to have military or a medical, pre-existing medical condition to be able to do that, which is just insane. Now, one of the options that's in the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is to consider making election days holidays.
Even so, everybody doesn't get a holiday off, but
right. Well, I think they should consider moving it, at least at a minimum. They should consider moving the in-person voting official day to a Saturday.
Yeah, that'd probably help. Here in Colorado, we get our ballots in the mail. They come and you have right up until election day to drop them off, or put them in the mail. It's really convenient for us because the city of Lakewood, where I live, has about 110,000 residents. And we had, if I'm remembering correctly, we had 8 drop-off locations in the last election. So, literally within, a couple of miles of just about everybody, you could go drop your ballot off. And so, it's just real easy. You get your ballot, you have time to, search the issues, look at the League of Women Voters if you want, and decide how you want to cast your vote. Sit down at your own kitchen table and, with a pen and fill out your ballot. There's no pressure. There's nobody standing in line telling you how to vote or, screaming at you because you're a liberal or conservative. You're just in your own home and you're doing, what you want to do with your ballot. So, and, I think in Colorado now, Republicans are, they're having a little trouble in Colorado right now, but during the 2 decades that I've lived here, the state house and the governorship have flipped back and forth. We've had a Republican governor. We had a horrible Democratic governor that we got rid of after 1 term. In fact, that's how Hickenlooper came to be the governor. He was the very popular mayor of Denver, and our Democratic governor was just horrendous and everybody hated him. And so he decided not to run for a 2nd term, and Hickenlooper ran and won. But our state house has flipped back and forth. From when I first got here, it was a Republican majority and by a lot. And then it was a Democrat majority by 1. Then it was a Republican majority by 1. And now it's, and then we had a split legislature where the Republicans controlled the Senate and the Democrats controlled the House. That was just 2 years ago. And then this past election in 2020, Democrats got control and pretty decisively of both sides of the chamber.
Well, so, I think you have to ask yourself, why does, and this was the question back to my original comment about the Senate committee today.
Yeah.
It was interesting to me because in that rules committee, they had both the majority and the minority leaders speak and give testimony. And it's interesting to me that, and this is a paraphrase of Majority Leader Schumer from New York, but it's interesting to me that one of the major political parties, their answer to everything is, let's get less people to vote.
Right.
That tells me right there, you can't win on your ideas.
Right.
Which brings us to our final topic tonight, which is the legislative filibuster. And I call it that because it's no longer used in the Senate to block federal judicial appointments or Supreme Court nominees, which was changed in the last term by Senate Majority Leader at the time, Mitch McConnell, Moscow Mitch. So there's a lot of push now from the Democrats, more and more Democrats coming out in favor of at least modifying the filibuster back to its original intent. Because as we've talked about, and I think we've spoken about this on other podcasts, but the original intent of the filibuster was that you had to speak and be on the floor and occupy the chamber and have 41 votes at all times in order to keep it going. It wasn't, hey, it's on the majority to get 60 votes in order to invoke cloture. It was they had to actually stay on the floor, and that's why you had Strom Thurmond and some of the other Dixiecrats and Southern Democrats filibuster the civil rights bills over the course of time in 1957 and in 1964 as well. They tried it, and I believe 62 as well, where they even went to the floor wearing catheters,
Right.
to try to lengthen the debate. The debate when that happens has to be germane to the topic as well. So there's a lot of talk about that. There's talk about just getting rid of the filibuster altogether. There's talk about doing a carve out where you could say on voting issues such as the Voting Rights Act, that bill could not be filibustered. So doing a carve out like they did on Supreme Court justices or federal justices, which was changed by Harry Reid when he was the majority leader of the Senate. Mitch McConnell, like we talked about last time, has threatened that he will go nuclear and he will block the Senate, slow everything down, won't give unanimous consent on anything, and just make it a session of gridlock. And my answer to that is, what's new?
Yeah, we've been in gridlock for 8 years or longer.
Yeah, if you look back at the last 4 years, what they did when Donald Trump was president and they had control of the Senate, they passed two major legislative things, legislative acts, and they were the tax cut bill, and then there was one other bill that they passed, and I forget what it was, but both were done under reconciliation.
Right.
It didn't require 60 votes. And the majority of what they did after that was confirm judges.
Yep. And they did that. And
so Mitch McConnell has no interest in passing legislation. He has no interest in negotiating on legislation. He has no interest in any of it. What I also find interesting is that he came out with a statement at a press conference yesterday where he said, and this is a quote, historians agree across the spectrum that the filibuster has never been used in a racial or racist way.
Huh.
Almost the entire history of the filibuster, back to John C. Calhoun, was designed to disenfranchise Black people and their rights.
Yeah, well, Strom Thurmond filibustered the 1950s Voting Rights Act and the 60s one as well. So, and then had a child with a Black woman.
I know, with his maid.
Yeah.
And kept it secret for years. So I guess my question to you is, how far do you think the Democrats should go? Should they nuke it all?
I think they should do whatever they need to do to get control and do what they want to do. That's what I think. If they can do that with having you stand up there and talk forever, then fine. If they don't think they can do that, then I'd say get rid of it altogether and tell Mitch McConnell to, as Spock said in one of the Star Trek movies, go to hell.
Yeah, I agree. I think they should start with the standing filibuster and I think they should do it on voting rights, because I think they should have the Republicans on the floor of the Senate fighting back against more people getting the right to vote.
Right.
And then that would be, from a campaign and political perspective, that would be incredible theater for somebody. I was trying to think of a Republican senator who is in danger next time that hasn't resigned already or said he's not going to run again. Maybe a Marco Rubio have to stand up there and answer for the filibuster. Maybe I can't think of any other. Who are some other? Maybe Ron Johnson. He's not going to worry about it.
Right.
But it will be interesting if they have to do that, because you're going to see, in order for them to keep the votes at all times, you're going to see people like Jim Inhofe and Charles Grassley and Richard Shelby, and who are all in their 80s, have to sleep on cots in the Senate cloakroom.
Right.
And we'll see how long that lasts and how long they're able to hold it. I think they should call McConnell's bluff and say, you want to slow everything down? hey, we'll just highlight every day. Here's what we want to do. Here's why you're not getting your checks.
Right.
It's because Mitch McConnell, because the obstructionist party never wins those arguments.
Right.
Remember when Newt Gingrich said, I'll just shut the government down and Bill Clinton will pay the price?
Yeah, he shut it down, and Newt Gingrich paid the price. In the
Yeah.
midterms, he got slammed.
Yeah. So I think the filibuster's outlived its usefulness. I don't know that it was ever useful, really.
Right.
It's the challenge we have as a country right now is that when you look at polls like you cited earlier for common sense gun reform, when you look at the COVID relief bill, you look at infrastructure, you look at a woman's right to choose, you look at voting rights, all those things, they have at least upper to mid 60% approval rating in the country.
Yep.
And the people who answer to about 38 to 40% of the country are the ones stifling it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, we live in a democracy. When you're in school, they teach you that democracy means that the majority rules, but for the last 20 years or so in America, it's been the minority that's ruled. And that's, mainly due to Mitch McConnell and his stranglehold and threats like he just made. And I think the Democrats ought to cause bluff. I think Chuck Schumer ought to grow a set and say, you know what, Mitch, we've had enough of your game, and so has the American people. We're here to get some stuff done, and we're going to do it. And if you're on board, then that's great. If you're not, then that's great too. But we're going to steamroll right over you, just like you did us with the judges, with Amy Coney Barrett, with Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh. We're just gonna shove it in your face and tell you to eat it and like it, and if you don't like it, eat it anyway. So,
that's exactly right.
Yeah,
I think you're dead on.
Yeah. One last thing before we go, I want to bring this up real quick. When Joe Biden was campaigning, I believe in one of the debates, he said that he would put forth a cabinet that looked like America. And, we have our first gay cabinet member in Pete Buttigieg. We have our first Native American in charge of the Interior. And while she's not in the cabinet, Dr. Rachel Levine became the first Assistant Secretary for Health in the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, Dr. Levine is a transgender woman, and the vote to approve her was 52 to 48 in the Senate.
Yeah, that's an incredible landmark moment for a country. Yeah. And I believe she's from Pennsylvania. Is that correct?
She is. She was Pennsylvania's top health official.
Yeah, and she did by all records that I've seen, she did a fantastic job during managing the COVID crisis in Pennsylvania. So kudos to her. Kudos to President Biden. I think he's done a phenomenal job in his first. I think we're like in 65 days, something like that.
Right.
And their goal was, while we're bragging on Uncle Joe, their goal was 100 million shots in the first 100 days, and they've already blown that out of the water.
Yeah.
So it's next time we'll talk about immigration, because I know that's a hot topic right now, and there's a lot of things happening. And I will just say this on the way out, is a little tease for next time. One of the things was that I heard the president give a statement today, which I thought was fantastic, when he put the vice president in charge of working relationships with Central America. But he said, what we're dealing with at the border is something that we inherited from the last administration. But no matter who we inherited it from, we're responsible and accountable for treating these people humanely. And we're going to do that. And so I thought that was phenomenal, because he owned it. He didn't blame, just say, oh, this is Trump's doing and everything's bad because of that. He said it's our responsibility. And so.
Right. Well, one of the complaints I heard about Obama when he got elected was that he blamed a lot on Bush for a number of years, like 3 years, I think. And, there was, the Bush left the economy in shambles without a good game plan for recovery. And Trump sort of did the same thing. But I just heard from one of my good friends about, when is Biden going to stop blaming Trump? And, 66 or so days in, it looks like he's going to stop. And, I think that's a good thing for the country, moving on, owning it, basically saying, we got to fix it. It's under our watch now. And I just think, when 4 years are up, America is going to look back on this administration and say, wow,
Yeah.
what a great 4 years we had. And we owe it all to Biden. So
Yeah, I agree. And it's one of those cases where when his candidacy was on life support, people doubted him. And I was the same way. I did not think he was going to win the nomination.
right.
But history as we've studied with different generals and different leaders, history has a way of putting the right leader in position at the right time.
Yep, absolutely.
And I feel like this is definitely a time for Joe Biden, and it's a time where his type of leadership was needed. Him being vice president under Obama, I think is phenomenal experience, first of all. But it also is, and I think President Obama would be the first one to say it too. It was a lesson to Joe Biden on what not to do too.
Yeah, absolutely. So
And I think he knew on this COVID relief bill that just was passed that Obama tried to negotiate for almost 6 or 7 months on the stimulus package with the Republicans at that time, and they would negotiate things out, and then they ended up not supporting it anyway. So
right.
he basically said, "This is our bill. If you're not going to good faith negotiate with me, then this is what it is."
Right. Well, the thing that cracks me up is Republicans passed a $2.3 trillion bill in December, and there was nothing wrong with that. And now here, 4 months later, Democrats want to do the same thing, only smaller, 1.9. And Republicans are like, oh, this is fiscally irresponsible. And I did want to throw one thing in. I did read, I don't want to get anybody's hopes up, but I did read where there's about 50 House members and 11 senators that are pushing for at least the next year to have monthly $2,000 checks into everybody.
Sounds like a plan to me.
We'll see if that passes.
Yeah. Great job tonight, G-Man. Thanks everybody for watching. Remember, as much as we talked about politics, we're still in a pandemic.
Yep.
A lot of folks are getting vaccinated, which is awesome. Make sure when it's your time, get vaccinated. And when you're out and about, still social distance, still follow the CDC guidelines, wear a mask.
Yep.
Let's beat this thing because I'm ready to go on vacation.
Yeah, me too. So I just had to move my trip overseas to 2022. So, all right, everybody. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Good night.